this thing about website accessibility is it is literal code and content fixes on a website, but it's also making sure you have these internal processes in your organization to avoid them in the future, whether it's good training of your content team or your dev team, or also like training of your support team to recognize things and escalate as appropriate.
Hey, welcome back to Agency Success. This one is jam-packed, so be ready to take notes, hit pause, and rewind. I'm joined by Amber Hines from Equalize Digital. She's an agency owner, longtime WordPress contributor, and one of the clearest voices in the WordPress world on website accessibility. In this conversation, Amber lays out a practical step-by-step approach to making your website accessible, including what to audit first, how to prioritize fixes, what agencies need to know right now about the European Accessibility Act. If you build websites for clients or your website is a key part of your business, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Agency Success. We got a friend of mine, longtime friend of mine, longtime WordPress contributor, agency owner, a lot of different things. You've spoken, talked, I know, done all kinds of things in WordPress, but Amber Hines from Equalize Digital, welcome back to Agency Success.
Thanks for having me, Corey. I'm glad to be here.
Well, first and foremost, and I want to talk about this later, but would you share a little bit about what you do? Because I mean, I was writing down notes for this, but I know you do a lot. And when I think about accessibility, I think about you. You've been a champion for it and everything. But I know, like I mentioned, agency owner, products, travel, different things that you do. Would you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm the CEO of a company called Equalize Digital. We are a mission-driven organization that is focused on accessibility on the web, specifically in WordPress, but we also do a lot outside of WordPress as well. We have two WordPress plugins. The one that is best known is called Accessibility Checker, and this has a free version on WordPress.org and also paid versions that helps people find and fix accessibility problems on WordPress websites. And then we also have a new one that we launched last year at the end of the year called Archive WP, which is a plugin that specifically helps people who want to maintain archived old content that falls under exceptions for needing to be made accessible under some of the accessibility laws that exist worldwide. And then we have like a handful of other free plugins that are just on WordPress.org. So we have those products, and then we do accessibility services as well. We do a lot of accessibility auditing for other agencies where they're the web team and they do the design and the web development, and then we provide feedback, and then they frequently do all the fixes and that kind of thing. We also do accessibility auditing for WordPress plugins and outside of WordPress as well, all kinds of different websites that are not WordPress websites. And beyond what I do at my company, I am a board member on the WP Accessibility Day nonprofit, which runs an annual conference on WordPress accessibility and does some other things related to accessibility education. And I'm on the core WordPress accessibility team and contribute to accessibility in WordPress core.
Okay. For all you
There's
listening,
something else.
yeah, it probably
I
is.
know there's something else that I'm forgetting, but
There's 50 reasons why, we wanted to come to you again. We've had Amber on in the past, but wanted to talk about accessibility because you're in all the things, which is awesome. A true champion for it. Well, I want to come back to a bunch of those things because there's so much in there. But the big one is the European Accessibility Act. And as the one I think about going to and asking these things, what does that European Accessibility Act mean? As the first, what is it?
So, the European Accessibility Act is a directive that came out of the EU, which oversees all of the member states. And it basically required all of the countries that are part of the European Union to create laws within them that require websites that belong to companies that make more than 2 million euro in annual turnover or have greater than 10 employees to make their websites accessible. So, this is a pretty landmark piece of legislation because it doesn't just touch on government websites, which is what a lot of the laws we've seen in the past were about. It explicitly talks about e commerce, um, ebooks, like a lot of digital content and things that are out there for profit organizations and nonprofits as well, as long as they hit these same revenue or employee thresholds. And so it's it's really great and that it's going to help push a lot of websites to be more accessible for people with disabilities so that everyone can buy products or services. But it is very maybe worrisome for people who are less familiar about accessibility and agencies that are building websites because now if they have a client that meets those thresholds, they need to start paying attention to accessibility.
Absolutely. So the first thing that kind of comes to my mind when you were giving that brief about it, and thank you, that was excellent, is it started last year, I believe. But the 10 employees and the $2 million is really interesting. And by the way, we've got a link to Amber's full blog post about the European Accessibility Act in the show notes today. So go there for sure. But I'm just curious, some nuance around that. The 2 million and revenue and 10 employees and who that might pertain to and how it kind of works.
Sure. So it's like I mentioned, it really those are the thresholds. The enforcement began in June of 2025. So by this point in time, websites were supposed to have been made accessible. That said, the government recognizes for some of these things that there is a process or a time frame. Many of the countries actually have mandated reporting. So any organization who meets this threshold, if they know their website is not accessible, there is a specific form on a government website specific to their country where they have to go report and say, here are the problems that I know about on my website and my timeline for planning to fix it. Uh, Also, websites need to have accessibility statements linked in their footer that go to a page, and it has a very specific format and things that they have to include, like what are the known problems, how can people get accessibility support or report accessibility problems, timelines for fixing, as well as information that link back to the specific entity in that country where a third party could go report a complaint about a website. Um, and all of this is outlined on the blog post, so it's kind of a lot of information to just hear, but basically at this point in time, organizations need to have at least done an audit, and so if you are maintaining a website for an organization that falls under this, if you haven't even done an audit, like, that would be the first thing you need to do is start figuring out what are the problems that exist on the website, and then from there, making a plan for what does remediation look like, starting with the key areas of the site. I always think of like a marketing funnel. I would start at the bottom of the funnel, like your checkout form or the contact form page, and then go back up the funnel as far as priority and how you fix things.
You totally answered my question that I was thinking about is if I'm looking at this European Accessibility Act, where do I start? So I heard first is audit. Can we start there for a second? I love the funnel thing. We'll get to that in just a second. But when we think about an audit, so let's say I've got a client, I'm an agency, I've got a client that needs to do some work, or I'm someone at a company seeing this and going, I need to start working on this. So what is included? I know you do a lot of audits for other agencies and your clients. You've got, all kinds of accessibility tools. What should I be thinking about in those kind of roles about an audit? What am I looking for? What should I expect or what should I go seek out to find?
So, auditing is a multi step process. You typically would want to start with an automated tool. So, like our accessibility checker plugin, you can add it to the site. And I would recommend test like your home page and your header and footer areas and fix everything there. That's like all your global stuff that's going to show up everywhere in the header and footer. And you can do automated testing. We'll find some of the issues, but it won't find all of the issues. So the next thing that needs to be done after doing automated tests and fixing those obvious problems like empty buttons, empty links, ambiguous text, things like that, is you want to do keyboard testing. And what that typically entails is you load the front page of your website and you use the tab key to move through all of the interactive components. So this means links and buttons on the website. And then you check to make sure that a link can be followed by pressing the return key and a button can be interacted with by using either the space bar or the return key. So you have to test both. You should see a outline around each item as it receives keyboard focus. And basically you should be able to go sort of like, for the most part, left to right, top to bottom, and you should be able to reach all items and be able to interact with them only with the keyboard. So that means if you have an accordion, you should be able to open and close it and read the content inside it without having to use a mouse. If you have a carousel, you should be able to change the currently visible slide using only your keyboard. If you have products, it's an e-commerce website, you need to be able to add a product to the cart, navigate to the cart, complete a checkout only using the keyboard without a mouse. And then after you do that keyboard testing, you would want to do screen reader testing. We do actually have courses. I have an online course on both VoiceOver for Mac and NVDA for Windows, which you can find on our website if you want to learn how to do screen reader testing. If you're like, no way, I hate that, or that just seems overwhelming, how do I learn to do all this stuff? Or if you're super worried about compliance because you know that it's a high target website, then I would advise that you bring in a trained accessibility professional to do this auditing for you, because there is a lot of nuances to it. And if it is, a very large e-commerce website, for example, and you're not comfortable in accessibility or you don't feel like an expert, I would not put yourself or your business at risk by being like, sure, I'll do all the auditing myself to make it cheaper for your client. Yeah, I would just say to your client, we
Yeah.
need to bring in a professional who does this every day, because then that professional takes on the risk of if something was missed, not you.
Uh,
And you could still like white label their work or like manage the client relationship, but you don't have to be the one who's saying it's accessible when maybe it's not.
Yeah, and I know that's why we've asked you, and I know why you do so many talks and participate in projects in WordPress in particular, because this subject is one we all care about but don't always know about and what to do. So that first you've laid out so beautifully there, with how to use some of the tools that are out there, including your own scanner. And gosh, that was a quick like 15-second tutorial on tab, cursor space, enter. Incredible. So that's kind of audit, just seeing if you have, you know, things you probably need to work on with it. And then part two you said was plan.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. So once you have a list of issues, basically the way we handle this is we prioritize. So I mentioned before, bottom of the funnel up. Anything that's a global issue, header or footer, sidebar areas, I would fix those first before you're doing like individual content pages. Um, and really, in WordPress, the way you look at this a lot of the times is you're making decisions on, is this something I can fix in the theme? If it's coming out of a specific plugin, I would first go to the plugin developer and report it to them. I have found plugin developers to be very responsive, especially if you can give them a detailed description of the problem. And a lot of times they will quite quickly release accessibility fixes, which is nice. Sometimes you do run into a scenario where they're like, yeah, that's not our priority. Or we'll do it, but they don't give you a timeline and your website has to be compliant. So then it becomes a situation of either A, can you patch it temporarily, which frequently means like writing JavaScript type of patch? Um, or B, is it so bad or so much work to modify that you need to change your plugin? Um, for example, there's accordions in core, but you might be using this old accordion plugin that isn't great for accessibility. Well, you could potentially go through and replace all the accordions on your website with core accordions instead of that plugin and then just remove that plugin, or maybe you have to switch to a different plugin. It sort of depends then too on how widespread the issue is and all of that kind of thing. Um, and that's something that if you hire somebody to help you with accessibility on the auditing, they should also be providing recommendations for fixes. So I would say if you are looking for a company to help you with that, I would make sure that they deeply understand WordPress, because there are a lot of auditing companies out there that don't get WordPress. And if they don't get WordPress, the result is what they're going to do is tell you this is what the HTML should read like. But they won't know something like, if you switch from this plugin to this other plugin, it'll just be fixed for you, right? And their recommendations will not be as actionable. I think too, as an agency, something you also have to think about on this is, what items are you going to fix versus your client? We are always doing collaborative remediation. So when we do remediation on websites, we're never fixing everything ourselves, only because it's way more cost effective for clients. If, for example, they have 5,000 images with no alt text, they don't want to pay a developer rate to write alt text, right? Their content team can go write the alt text. Or there's a lot of things that their content team could fix, as well. And so I think, like, looking at your audit and your recommendations, you want to have good recommendations that can explain things in a way, if it's related to content, that you can just pass it on to your client and they won't be confused. Um, so
Good point.
yeah.
Gosh, that's excellent. You've given such an overview of all the things to look for. We're talking about audit and plan. Did we leave anything out? Then is obviously the build out and stage, but you kind of got into that, I think, a little bit, saying, okay, there's even differentiation. Sometimes all things we can fix, but who's doing what?
Mhm.
Anything
Yeah,
else?
it is a lot of deciding who's doing what and when and planning, and the way I always like to put this is that it's very, one step at a time. It can be super overwhelming. The first time you put Accessibility Checker Pro on and you scan your whole website and it comes back with, here's like 50,000 problems, some of which are repeated, like global or that kind of stuff. Or if you get an audit and it's like, here's a very long list of hundreds of things that have to be fixed. I always just encourage people to try and remember that it's one step at a time. You can spread stuff out over months or weeks or whatever makes sense for the client and their budget. It doesn't have to be this massive project that we just work on it full time, 40 hours a week for 4 weeks, and then we launch it all fixed. You could fix and launch and fix and launch, which gets fixes out sooner and also can make it more cost effective and easier, to swallow, and just focus on those high priority things. I think actually there's a really good example of this, and this is one of the things I forgot to mention, was I run the WordPress accessibility meetup. And just recently, Brian Cords, who works at WooCommerce, and he has a podcast called Webmaster.fm. He's been really brave, and he's come on and let me find things that are wrong with his website, and he fixes them live. But, like, we're doing it in, like, an hour and a half, just like a Zoom webinar, which and then you can find them on our YouTube channel. But some of the things he's fixing have dramatic impact, and he's able to get quite a lot done in an hour and a half, many of them just in the editor, not even having to write code for it. And so I think if you try and think about it that way, what can I do in 3 or 4 hours? Even if it's only 3 or 4 hours a month, you can still make a big difference on a website.
And forgive me, but I know we've talked in the past, and you mentioned this really early on, accessibility statements. And there's I don't want to get this wrong, so you correct me, please. But there's another side of this, which is why you want to have an accessibility expert helping you with these things. Is a statement of, we are acknowledging, we know these things are happening, and we're actively working on them too. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so you should be able to get your audit and get a picture of what the problems are. And in Europe, they do require you to list out what known issues are. That's also pretty common in the US, particularly under 508. So we've worked on some university websites where they had mandated remediation um, because of an agreement with the Office of Civil Rights. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, in we were on with an attorney who works for the Office of Civil Rights, who like looks at these and talking with the university. And what she said was, don't waste people's time. So they had the accessibility statement, but they were actually advising, if you have a link to a PDF, so in this case, it was like a course catalog on a university website, and that PDF is not accessible, right where you're linking to it or linking off to your third-party site. Like, I've seen this sometimes. Companies use these third-party hiring platforms that are not accessible. Well, that's a violation of equal employment opportunity law, right? Like, if someone literally can't even apply or read what job openings you have. So they're saying you should have that in your accessibility statement, but also right where you're linking to the inaccessible thing, put a note there that says, this PDF hasn't been remediated yet, or if you experience issues with our hiring platform, here's how you can contact us to get the information and get the support. So that is really helpful, because the biggest thing I think with all of these laws is get people access and help them. And here in the US in particular, there's lawsuits is one of the biggest ways that enforcement happens under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I've had attorneys tell me that if it is a real lawsuit from a real person who genuinely wants to work with the business, the best way to avoid that is to make it clear how they can get help, and then have some sort of internal process. So you have to train your support team to recognize this is an accessibility request. Here's how I help them, but also not just help them and close a ticket. Help them close a ticket, go open an issue on GitHub or wherever you track these things, and report it up the chain and say, this accessibility issue was identified. I already helped the person and got them what they needed, but let's fix it so more people don't. And so this thing about website accessibility is it is literal code and content fixes on a website, but it's also making sure you have these internal processes in your organization to avoid them in the future, whether it's good training um, of your content team or your dev team, or also like training of your support team to recognize things and escalate as appropriate.
Gosh, I think you've said so many important things that I've written notes here about, but that one was huge. And there is a regulatory issue and a liability issue for businesses, but as we've talked in the past, this is about helping people consume and buy what you're offering them to, and doing kind of the right thing so that all people can access what you're doing online. But that right there is excellent, like, because it comes back to the fundamental part of business, right? There's a customer wanting to do something. Our teams need to know that. I think about that as hosting.com. So, what a great way to do that. But, Amber, thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to mention about accessibility overall? And I want to ask you just, you gave such a great summary about your agency work and the products, but I want to come back to a thing or two on that and how viewers can support WordPress Accessibility Day.
Sure. Yeah. So I don't know if there's anything else. You know what I might add just on accessibility as a whole? I think sometimes people think of it as a cost center. Like they're just like, oh, I don't, this doesn't get me any benefit. But what you were saying about it's about helping people buy from your website. And we have seen remediation after remediation, bumps in SEO, like organic traffic, bumps in traffic from ChatGPT, because the better HTML you have on your content, the better the bots can read it. So that is helpful. Increases in like student applications if they're applying for a university or something like that. But the other thing too, if you think about the costs to your team, and there was an interesting podcast episode we put out on our podcast, which is called Accessibility Craft with LearnDash. They actually saw a significant decrease in support tickets after they released accessibility fixes. Not because people were like opening support tickets about your accessibility is bad, but like it made the UI of the product better, so people could understand how to set up courses better or do things better. And so as a result, They were asking less questions to the support team, which resulted in lower costs. Um, and
Well,
so there really can be tons of benefits to it.
that true and practical one you said is like, when was the last time you looked at your footer? When was the last time you looked at some of the navigation? But I think that's the next way excellent way to frame that, for sure, because it's just another opportunity to see how things are working, especially and now today's day and age, you rely on your website for the core strategies of your business. Whether you're e-commerce or not, your website is vital. So an opportunity I hear to make things in the process and experience better for everyone too.
Mhm,
Okay, you mentioned some of these, but WordPress Accessibility Day and
mhm.
kicking off something today as we record in advance. And I got the scoop earlier, but can you tell us a little bit about WordPress Accessibility Day and the project you're kicking off?
Yes. WordPress Accessibility Day is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization that is focused on improving accessibility education in the WordPress community. We run an annual conference. This year it's going to be October 7th through 8th. I really hope I picked those dates right from my memory. But it's always the beginning of October from a Wednesday through Thursday. It runs a full 24 hours, single track live stream so that no matter where someone is in the world, there are going to be talks during their business hours. And that's what we've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. And this year, we were talking to some folks in the community, and they gave us the idea that it would be really great to have an accessibility focused booth at WordCamp Europe. Not like a little one, though, a big one that puts it front and center where everyone can see. So we have just started, and you're the first person to hear this, Corey, a crowdfunding campaign to see if we can get the community to help us support this idea. There will be a accessibility help desk at the booth. So throughout the entire event of WordCamp Europe, people can come get free help. Myself, Joe Dolson, and Bet Hannon, who are my co-board members, would be there, as well as Rian Reitfeld has volunteered to sit at that table. And she's an amazing person who can give a lot of great information and support about accessibility. And we're talking to some other folks in the community as well. So you would be able to come get free help, free audits, free recommendations for fixes. And then we would also be providing educational content on the European Accessibility Act and whether or not it applies to websites and how to meet that, as well as just generally educating people about WP Accessibility Day and what we do as an organization. So we are hoping to raise $30,000 to be able to support that initiative, having the large booth and having some volunteers there to help give out that free education.
Excellent. So head over to wpaccessibility.day and click on the link where you can donate to this great work in our WordPress community that benefits everyone. I love the idea of you all having a booth there. You have, and the others you've mentioned too, have championed this within our WordPress community because it's a thing that is needed desperately. And I so much appreciate your work you've done. So go over there and support Amber and team in this great work. Amber, thank you so much. I know you're super busy. We were talking before we started, like how, the winter break comes and you get maybe a breath and you come back to a tidal wave. And I know you're doing that with all the things you juggle. But thank you so much for being back here at hosting.com's Agency Success channel.
Thank you for having me.